Listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. My name is Robin Kincaid, and I'm from Nevada PEP, and I want to welcome you today to our 1-hour webinar, Transition Planning, Navigating Your Future. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to have the opportunity to have a conversation about a very important topic, which is transition. Nevada PEP is a parent training and information center. We cover the entire state of Nevada, and we do want to welcome you to our webinar. We are helping families learn about their child's disability and providing support, information, and encouragement to parents. We're part of a network of parent centers that are all over the United States. Nevada PEP is a nonprofit organization, and there's no charge for any of our services. We are all parents of children with disabilities, or some of our staff have a disability themselves, but we are here to be that listening ear to help families find the information and the resources that they need to help their children. As parents of children with disabilities, we understand that it can be challenging and it can be difficult sometimes to get the answers and the information that families need in order to feel as though that they are confident in working with the school or in accessing adult services, which we're certainly going to talk about today. The families that we help have children ages 0 to 26. So we are here for a significant amount of time in that family's life. And we're looking forward to talking to you a little bit more if you have questions. We also have a question pinned in the webinar, so please see that down below. Feel free to type in a question. We also want to encourage you to download the handouts. So please, if you don't show them there, feel free to email me privately and I'll send you the handouts. It's rkincaid, KINCAID, @nvpep.org. So we might just go ahead and email everyone a set of handouts. So you'll have those handouts. So we're going to go through a series of PowerPoint slides that will help you understand some of the key things that occur when students that are becoming young adults start going through transition. Typically the transition age is ages 14 to 22, but we're going to be talking about the school. We're going to also talk about the adult services and what happens after high school. So once again, thanks for joining us. I'm going to switch out the screen real quick. And then we can get started with the PowerPoint slides regarding the transition. All right. Hopefully you can see our logo here and our mission statement. So making the transition from the structure of high school to the challenges and responsibilities of adulthood can be an overwhelming task for many students with disabilities and their families. So we're going to explore options and choices students will find they have as they move towards college employment, and independent living. Often when I'm working with families that have children in the transition age, I want to always remind them that the purpose of IDEA, which is the Individuals Disability Education Act, is for schools to provide services that are individualized, that meet the unique needs, and help prepare students for further education, competitive integrated employment, and living independently. So we just always want to keep going back to what is the role of the school, how can parents work together to achieve those three things, that students have the opportunity to be able to get further training and further education, and certainly be able to seek employment that makes them feel valued and that they are able to feel part of a working and purposeful working. And then certainly opportunities to live on a more independent basis. So transition planning helps students and families think about life after school or high school or even after college, and identify some long-range goals and the steps required to achieve those goals. This type of planning helps make decisions about the type of services to make sure that students are gaining the skills and the connections to different agencies. So in one of our handouts, which again we'll email to everyone that is here, is that it talks about the 9 different domains of life. So let's think about a student with a disability and maybe their skill level in the areas of finances, personal appearances, self-advocacy. Will that individual have the employment or the education needs after high school? What about living arrangements? What about transportation? What will the child do for fun? Can the child manage his or her own medical needs? So think about, as we look at this information, what kind of situation that would apply to a student that you know, or even your own child. But this is why transition planning is so very important. Preparing while the young adult is still in high school can help ensure a successful transition. So here's some of the things that we'll talk about today. We all experience transitions in general, and we can find them either challenging or stressful. It could be moving to a different house, losing or starting a job, marrying or divorcing a spouse. So using a broad definition, transition means change. Today we're going to be talking about transition as it relates to the Individuals with Disability Education Act, IDEA. IDEA is a federal law that provides for special education in the United States. So we're going to cover what exactly transition is in the special education process, the specifics of transition, who participates in the transition planning process, and what are the students' rights and responsibilities. So the goal of this training is to provide an in-depth look at the transition process so that the student, parent, school, and community can fully participate. Students may not always know their strengths, interests, or preferences, and they may not be really very good at describing them. Adults may need to help a student recognize their aptitude in a specific area. At this point, we're talking about transition, so we want to begin to help the students see how their strengths, interests, and preferences can lead to potential employment and lifelong learning. So let's think about a child you might know. What are the strengths, interests, and preferences? And then how could that be a benefit or potentially help them achieve goals in the adult world? So one of the things that we see is that, let's say the student really likes to be around animals. And so Is there an opportunity for the student to gain some pre-employment skills, or what we call soft skills, by volunteering at a shelter or a veterinary hospital? So what would the student need in order to be able to do that? Would they need to be able to follow directions, be rather compliant, learn what their responsibilities and tasks are? Those are the kind of things that we want to help expose students with disabilities to at a young age, so they start thinking about, this is my passion, this is what I want to do. So a student that has a strong communication skills, maybe they could be working as a receptionist or someone who helps people in the community locate things they need. Someone who has a real passion for aviation or historical, could they possibly work in a museum? A lot of times, students in general, even students with and without disabilities, could be doing internships and volunteer types of opportunities in order to gain the confidence and those pre-employment skills of showing up on time, being able to stay focused through your entire shift, all of those things that are necessary for successful employment as an adult. Now we would like to talk about self-determination. It is an important piece that is discussed in transition. The process of becoming self-determined individual is one of gaining control over one's life. Self-determination skills include self-awareness, self-advocacy, being confident, being self-informed, knowledge of the disability and how it impacts them, decision-making and goal setting, being as independent as possible, and be able to self-evaluate and self-reflect and make adjustments to skills or to implement some problem solving. One of the things that I've done with my own daughter frequently is work on decision making. Now, we all know that as young adults or as teenagers, we didn't always make the best decisions. But it's important to practice making decisions. Often, children with disabilities get a lot of decisions made for them. Children that have a lot of medical kinds of experiences are often in a situation where many decisions are made for them, or if they have low mobility, lots of decisions are made where they're going to go, what they're going to do next. So we want to encourage students at a young age to make good decisions and make them more frequently, and we always know that's going to lead to better judgment and less impulsive decisions. So it's crucial for students with disabilities to develop, practice, and apply self-determination skills in the relative safety of family and high school settings. So youth that leave high school with self-determination skills have a greater chance of achieving positive post-secondary outcomes than the ones that do not. Self-determination youth are also going to be able to exert greater control in the selection and the use of adult services and supports in their post-secondary education and employment goals. So Nevada PEP has developed a guide that helps students become familiar with self-determination process. The Where Am I Going? How Will I Get There? Interactive guide provides opportunities for students to focus on self-awareness and self-advocacy skills, encourages discussion, opportunities to practice decision-making, and participate in the IEP and transition planning. It helps students answer questions such as, how do I learn best? What am I good at doing? What type of personality do I have? What accommodations help me be successful in school and work? What are some of the jobs or careers that interest me? In what environment do I learn and work best? So you can access the guide on our website. There is also a voiceover of Kevin that will help students that might have a lower reading level be able to have Kevin read the sections to them, and helps them be able to process the information and the questions a little bit better. As parents and families of students with and without disabilities look to the future, it is never too early to start talking about what the future might hold. Parents or the adults in the child's life may want to talk about like chores and responsibilities at the home, beginning when the child is still young. And as they get older, helping the youth think about developing strategies on how to handle change, practice decision making, or even start developing a portfolio, keeping items that show decision making, taking initiative, academic grades, or, even areas where they've shown to have some high-level skills or have received awards for excellence. In addition, one of the handouts that you will be receiving is Charting a Course for the Future is another transition handout. But who knows that child better than the parent? Whether we believe it or not, parents have a significant influence over their youth. Studies have shown that particularly with middle to high school students, that parents' impact can have the greatest effect in the areas of the high expectations for success, discussing plans for the future, getting help if needed, helping the students prepare for college, even monitoring progress, knowledge of course and classes, and helping students recognize how important it is to establish a network that might have family, neighbors, coworkers. Those networks are really important. But parents are integral members of the planning and placement team. They bring a wealth of information about their children, which is critical to effective transition planning. But parents must become informed advocates about quality transition planning, services in the community, and agencies that can assist the child in achieving success and independence in their communities. Parents also would want to understand the differences between entitlement of special education programs under IDEA and the eligibility for services of adult agencies. Parents know their community and have many contacts that they can share to assist in the provision of community training alternatives and activities. Parents and students must be willing and committed to assist in the implementation of identified transition activities. Parents can advocate for and initiate new programs that do not currently exist in the child's school or community. Now, I have found as a parent of a young adult individual, or my young adult daughter, that I've actually had to kind of take the role of a service coordinator in order to ensure that the different agencies work together, that they provide the services they're supposed to provide. And so often families find themselves in that situation to where they have to take a much larger role in ensuring that some of these things happen when they're supposed to happen. So next we're going to discuss the IEP itself. We're going to talk about the slides, in these slides, about the family and the advocates use the IEP to make the most out of the transition process. So according to the federal law, the IEP teams must begin transition planning when the student turns 16 years old, and will cover the areas of post-secondary education, vocational education, competitive integrated employment, including supported employment, continuing and adult education, adult services, independent living, and or community participation. So the information known about the student's interests in these areas is going to be used to develop the measurable post-secondary goals. But remember, a student may not know what they're interested in or may have difficulty in expressing it, but the measurable post-secondary goals still need to be written. These goals are based on age-appropriate transition assessments related to the areas of training, education, employment, and where appropriate, independent living skills. Transition assessments use methods that take into account both chronological and developmental ages. The many families that call Nevada PEP often do not know that the school is required to do these transition assessments. One of the first things our transition staff talk to the families about is, have there been any transition assessments? Have they done interest surveys or interest inventories? And has that information been put together in the present levels? So the age-appropriate transition assessment findings are listed there in the present level page, and they should be administered annually. So once a year, they should go back and try either some different assessments or look at what has changed, what has the child experienced that might lead them to have different interests. Although the transition planning age begins at age 16 under federal law, according to Nevada law in the Nevada Administrative Code, IEP teams must begin talking to the student about some of the parts of transition planning process at age 14. So if the student's 14 years or older, a statement of the transition services with regard to the student's course of study, including without limitation participation in advanced placement courses or a vocational educational program. We also have in your packet that we'll be sending you by email the transition checklist, which is a good way for both the student and the parent to kind of think about this process. The IEP team may prepare a statement prior to the age of 14 if it's appropriate. Statement of transition services must be updated annually because the student's course of study or placement may change. So the team for the transition IEP really isn't very much different than the IEP team, with the exception that the student may become more involved in the IEP process, and more people with specific knowledge to the transition process may be invited to attend the IEP. When the purpose of the IEP meeting is to discuss transition, the student must be invited to the meeting. However, he or she is not required to attend. If the student, can't attend the meeting, then the school must take other steps to make sure that the student's preferences and interests are considered in the plan that is developed. Parents or students who have reached the age of majority may invite service representatives and other individuals identified as transition consultants to the IEP meeting with the focus of transition. They don't need to be in every IEP meeting of the student. If they can't attend the meeting, focusing on transition, talking to them about the IEP, and bringing their ideas and comments to the meeting. Traditionally, when talking about transition, vocational rehabilitation and the regional center might be the suggested agencies to invite. But think of others that know the child. Would they be able to offer insight into the abilities, potential, or aptitude of the child? So some examples might be that in the school setting, there's a possibility that the child is hearing feedback from staff that he's not motivated or he's not been able to be responsive in completing his work. But he is doing extremely well in a preferred activity such as karate. So his karate teacher might be coming in and talking about what are some of the motivational strategies that they use in that activity in order for the student to feel really successful and is achieving a lot more in that setting than he might be in certain school settings. So members from similar language or cultural backgrounds can help the team also understand how cultural or language issues impact the transition process. So some typical transition outcomes, such as maybe even like going away to college or getting a paying job or moving out of the house and making decisions independently of the family, can be valued differently by different cultures. So it's just important to be really respectful that not every culture can embrace that separation, and there are many families that their overall goals and plans involve staying in, for example, one house, or for the student with disabilities not to work necessarily outside the home for a while. Now we're going to be talking about diploma options in Nevada. So each diploma option has requirements that must be met in order to achieve the diploma. We're actually going to be talking about 3 of them today. So the 3 diploma options are going to be the standard or advanced diploma is one of them, and the Nevada adjusted diploma is the second one, and then the last one we're going to refer to is the Nevada alternative diploma. In order to receive a standard diploma, a student needs to have at least 22.5 credits. And then they would have to take those end of course exams, and they would also need to complete and have access to the ACT test as well. For the adjusted diploma, the team's going to, again, they remain entitled to receive free appropriate public education until they either achieve a standard diploma or they exit, which would be or leave school at age 22. And the diploma option can be changed each time a family meets with the school in an IEP meeting. So at 17, we might be talking about standard. At 18 or 19, maybe we're talking about adjusted, and then maybe we're going back to standard. So there is a flexibility, and each time the team develops an IEP on an annual basis or even does a revision, we can revisit the diploma option for graduation. The alternative diploma is the newest diploma that Nevada has added as an option. And this was done back in the 2017 legislature. But the alternative diploma is available with students who are assessed on the Nevada alternate assessment. These Nevada requirements for alternative diploma align to the academic coursework and the college and career readiness assessment, the ACT requirements for students working toward achieving a standard diploma. Now, students remain eligible for services until their 22nd birthday. So it does not terminate the free appropriate public education. But they must participate in the Nevada alternate assessment. So again, the alternative diploma is very new, but it is another option for students and their parents to consider. So just wanted to mention in the graduation requirements, these end-of-course exams, again, for standard diploma, and the impact of the course exams have on the student and their grade. So we no longer have Nevada high school proficiency examinations. In fact, I'd like to mention that if a student prior to the last 2015 had the course credits and just did not pass the high school proficiency examination, then they could go back to their school district and discuss with them their eligibility to receive a standard high school diploma. So that option is still out there. Again, we've got that question pane open. If questions come to mind, please type in a question. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have. So the IEP team needs to begin discussing the student's vision for the future. This could be a discussion about whether the student wants to go to college or what kinds of professions they're interested in gaining more information or going into. Statement is added to the student's IEP as a direct quote from the student, as well as a statement being revisited each year to see if the student's vision has shifted. So how does the student see his or her future? Does it include post-secondary education? And sometimes those questions are hard to answer. Students sometimes get a little overwhelmed with high school. They feel like it's either too hard, maybe they're not having a good high school experience, and so it sometimes is difficult. But the next phase of further education can be quite different than the high school setting. And we always try to help families and students see that it may be where a student is just more focused in on a particular subject and they only take 1 or 2 classes in college versus having to be at high school like 6 hours. Some students may not know what they should expect for the future or be able to express it. So parents and the rest of the IEP team can help by asking questions like, do you want to have a job? Do you know what working feels like? Do you know how to follow directions? Do you want to go to college? Do you want to learn more about a particular subject that you have a strong interest in? So the next box on the transition page is where the student's vision of the future is listed, which is that quote directly from the student. Of course, as the student grows and matures, his or her vision may change, and there could be an indecisiveness or even no comment. Some students' disability are going to make it more difficult to gather interest in the vision, and efforts can be made to use different strategies, such as the use of assistive technology or even more person-centered planning process. So if the vision changes, then the IEP should address the change with appropriate transition services to support that vision. Beginning when the student is 14, a short statement that describes the course of study the student is going to be pursuing is added to the IEP. Some examples of the course of study could be studies such as academic course of study, vocational course of study, maybe a vocational course of study with an emphasis on functional academics. So it's not unique to a particular class that the student is taking. It's really just talking about the types of classes and what kinds of information the student is receiving, and could be talking about in the relationship of whether or not it is high-level academic information or is it really more functional, where we're teaching a student how to use skills, for example, such as money, or teaching them in a way to where they are going to apply it on a daily basis. So now we're talking about the measurable post-secondary goals, which I believe is let's make sure you've got that up as well. Here we go. This is where the desired outcomes for each checked area is described. If the student is 16, an outcome should be written in at least of the area of training and education and employment and should be measurable. The descriptions reflect what the student wants to do after high school, where and how the student wants to live, work, have fun, learn, participate in the community. The coordinated activities then can be planned to facilitate a successful transition from high school. As we stated before, transition is a process, and the change in expectations for the future are inevitable. If there are changes, then the IEP should address the change with appropriate transition services. So now we're looking at these measurable post-secondary goals, and here are some responses that you could think about in training and education. The response could be like attending college at UNLV, or it could be taking a course at a health institute or trade school. Could even be like an internship where you are taking classes but actually working in the field. In employment, it could be that we try a variety of jobs. Think about when you were a young adult and in high school, we all probably had a variety of different kinds of jobs. I worked at a restaurant that primarily sold fish and chips for a while. I worked at a hamburger stand, worked at a variety of different kinds of part-time jobs to gain experience and learn how to respond to an employer more appropriately. And then independent living skills might be, you're going to share an apartment with someone? Are you going to rent a room out of a house? What kinds of responses would help us get to learning about what the individual with disabilities thinks they might want to do? And again, that certainly can change. They might end up be living in a dorm if they decide to attend a college, out of their family's the area where their family lives. So transition planning is essentially a written plan that supports a student with disability in moving out of high school and into adulthood. The written plan is part of the IEP and is developed by the IEP and the student. The team could also include some community agencies. It is a results-oriented process. That means that we're focusing on real outcomes for the student, taking into account the student's strengths, preferences, and interests. Transition process includes services like instruction, could be related services such as speech therapy or occupational therapy, community experiences that are provided to help the student meet his or her employment and other post-secondary or post-school adult living objectives. And if it's appropriate, to help the student acquire daily living skills and functional vocational evaluation. So when planning for transition, it's necessary for the team to consider the student's needs as they relate to what he or she wants to do after high school and determine what types of services and supports the student will need to get there. Here's the part that covers the coordinated activities. This is where we're going to write a statement of transition strategies or activities to work toward the desired outcomes identified in those measurable post-secondary goals. So these strategies or activities could be provided by various agencies or even in other locations. So remember, this page is really very much of a planning page where we're really talking about what we'd like to see happen. So the parents need to know what kinds of agencies, might offer certain services and what the services would look like. So potential agencies might offer something to the transition process, can be invited by the school team to attend the IEP with the parents and the student's consent. If an agency is to be responsible for services and unable to attend, there should be attempts to have them at the IEP with materials or through prior conversations documented. If the outside agency failed to implement agreed upon services, the school district has to kind of like find other ways to provide this transition service. So here we're talking about instruction is one of the first areas, the kinds of instructional activities that the student might need. So if we had a student that was like planning on going to broadcasting school, then we would talk about that she's going to spend some time with her counselor and exploring the different kinds of broadcasting school options, maybe even speaking on the phone with someone from the school and asking what the requirements are and what does it take to go through this type of school. So related services could be, for example, like physical therapy. Sometimes we see students might needing some support in the area of speech therapy if they are doing community-based instruction. In other words, helping them with the script of so they can ask where something is in the store at customer service counter. So speech therapists might talk about the way to initiate a conversation and wait for your turn and to wait until the other person is ready to have that conversation. So speech therapists often are very good at teaching those types of skills. Other things that might need to be taught more specifically would be if individuals are accessing things in the community and there's some mobility concerns, or even related to vision, could one of the related service personnel, either an occupational therapist or a physical therapist, provide that service to teach the person with disabilities how to access in the community that might look different than how to access things on their school campus. The next box here is the community experiences. This is where the school would identify the types of things that they're going to work in the community on, how they're going to, or how frequently they're going to provide some community experiences. Some things certainly would be like teaching a student how to access bank or even stores. Again, those are all about independent living. Do they know how to go fill out an application to get an apartment? Do they know how to find their Social Security office? This also might include some mobility training as well. Let's talk about community-based instruction. It is services that are provided outside of the school building in the community settings, perhaps by schools or other agencies. And it could include community-based work experiences, job site training programs, banking, shopping, transportation, community counseling, recreational services, independent living centers. So a key to community-based instruction is to offer experiences across settings and time periods to promote generalization to the environment outside of the school settings. It should be more than just a field trip. It should have purpose. Related service providers such as speech therapists or occupational therapists, again, could be part of the team that implements these community-based instruction in order for the student to move toward meeting their goals and objectives. The employment box is where the services that lead to a job or career, including the development of a work-related skills, determining the areas of interest, appropriate soft skills such as teamwork, decision-making, and communication, is going to help the student become more effective employees and managers. Training and job seeking and retention are going to be written on this page as well. But keep in mind, employment can be categorized in different ways. Competitive integrated employment is employment with earnings comparable to those paid to individuals who do not have disabilities. Supported employment is competitive integrated employment or employment in an integrated work setting, which individuals with most significant disabilities are working on a short-term basis toward competitive integrated employment while receiving ongoing support services in order to support and maintain those individuals in employment. It also could include in-school opportunities like completing interest inventories and continuing to work on time management, internships, or even job shadowing. Other things relating to employment, accessing the DMV or other transportation access needs, bus, door-to-door services, finding volunteer opportunities, understanding financial needs to meet living expectations. Other topics could be becoming a registered voter, accessing one's medical needs, providing or having housing provided, finding out about eligibility for SSI and insurances, and finding out how you pay your taxes. Daily living skills is another part of transition planning, making sure that students learn about appropriate dress, health, self-care, in-home care, and activities, or a need for functional vocational evaluation that tells us that there's gaps and areas that need to be worked on. Some of the regional centers could be helpful in helping families locate different companies that provide supported living arrangements, which is where individuals help young adults acquire more skills. So an example might be that they might be working on using the microwave in the family's home or in the young adult's place of residence so that that young adult could make their breakfast every morning and have a warm breakfast sometimes. The team could also consider even the young adult taking a class in foods and joining clubs and activities about meal preparation, maintaining a house, budgeting, bill paying, and taking care of one's self and one's health care. Okay, now we're going to move on to the goal pages in the IEP. If measurable post-secondary goals and coordinated set of transition activities have been written, it only makes sense that the annual goals would also be written to address transition. So when doing an IEP of a student ages 14 years or older, the annual goals are written with this transition thinking. An example might be that the student who is still not able to produce certain sounds for concise communication, now the team might be starting to look at some other ways of communicating in the community with maybe assistive technology. But taking into consideration, how does the annual goal relate to age-appropriate transition assessments? Remember, those results are found on the present levels and the students' measurable post-secondary goals. So when there's an actual correlation between the annual goal and the measurable post-secondary goal, the IEP needs to indicate the relationship. The areas of training, education, and employment should be checked so that families and professionals know that the goals are focused toward training and employment. We're going to go back to that front of that IEP so we can remind ourselves of part of the procedural safeguards. So when you read what that says down there, this actually means that for the first time that's discussed when the student is actually 16. So transition's about preparing the student for when there's a shift to the student becoming responsible for their educational program. So within the transfer of rights, not their parents, they become the primary participant in developing their IEP, and they become responsible for making other decisions, such as consenting to changes in placement requesting mediation or a due process hearing to resolve disputes. So as you can see down there, it is important that this process of making the student familiar of the transfer right occur. It doesn't have to occur necessarily in the meeting, but the school does have the obligation to inform their rights under IDEA and advise that these rights are going to be transferred at the age of 18. Parents of Nevada students who take the Nevada alternate assessment, those who are not taking the state proficiency test, can request an application for the transfer of rights exemption. And so they could fill out this form that would go back to the school, and the principal would sign the form, and it would say that because the student's taking this Nevada alternate assessment, that they would like the rights to stay with the parent. This individual has to have a significant disability, and the parent has to indicate that they don't feel that the student could make that decision regarding their rights, and they would like to retain them as a parent. It has to be submitted, though, at least 90 days before the date of the student is going to attain the age of 18, and the earliest it can be submitted is when the student is 16. The parent or the adult representing the student will want to have a copy of that approved exemption in their child's folder and request a copy for themselves as well. The law does not require. It may be helpful to request an evaluation or reevaluation before the student leaves high school, preferably in their last 3 years of high school. This evaluation can be helpful when accessing services in the post-secondary setting. With the reauthorization of IDEA, in the last reauthorization, there came the formalized summary of performance. So when a student graduates with a standard diploma or ages out, which they could age out at the end of their 21st year up to age 22, the school district must provide the child with a summary of the child's academic achievement and functional performance, which will include recommendations on how to assist the child in meeting the child's post-secondary goals. This information is necessary under Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act to help establish a student's eligibility for reasonable accommodations and supports in post-secondary settings. The information about the student's current level of functioning is intended to help post-secondary institutions consider accommodations for access. These recommendations should not imply that any individual who qualified for special education in a high school will automatically qualify for services in the post-secondary education or the employment setting. Post-secondary settings will continue to make eligibility decisions on a case-by-case basis. So the timing of the completion of the summary of performance can vary depending on the student's post-secondary goals. If the student is transitioning to higher education, the summary of performance with additional documentation may be necessary as the student applies to a college or a university. Likewise, this information may be necessary as the student applies for services from state agencies such as vocational rehabilitation. In some instances, it may be most appropriate to wait until the spring of the student's final year to provide an agency or an employer the most updated information on the performance of the student. Some additional transition topics. We've moved past the IEP, and we want to talk about still what's available. Remember, the student's no longer entitled to a free, appropriate public education when the student either graduates from high school with a regular high school diploma or exceeds the age of eligibility for FAPE, free, appropriate public education, under state law, which in Nevada is age 22. So in Nevada, the age of majority is 18 years. That means a student is eligible to vote, register with Selective Services, get married without permission, and enter into contracts or go to the doctor alone. Guardianship is another transition topic. It's a personal, individualized family decision. It does require the courts to be involved and go through a process to approve a guardianship application. There are some other alternatives to guardianship, such as more like supported decision making. And so feel free to call Nevada PEP if you have questions about that or you would like more information about supported decision making. It's a good idea to discuss the responsibilities of becoming an adult with a child early. Children don't really wake up the day they turn 18 ready with the knowledge to manage their lives that they didn't have when they went to bed the night before. So it's back to the idea of teaching about decision making and self-determination. But being independent means you know when to ask for help. Being self-confident means that knowing when you're able to provide informed consent. Does the individual need someone to help them understand what they're asked to consent to? This individual may always want to review items with their family, another adult, or an advocate or advisor. So we kind of teach, and I taught my own daughter this, is that it's important that if she's going to make a decision that she use her family as advisors. And I think that it's somewhat natural. Any decisions I make, I would consult with my husband, especially anything that is of any financial level at all. Up until the student leaves high school by either graduating with a standard diploma or aging out, they've been entitled to receive FAPE, Free Appropriate Public Education. Services after high school are based on eligibility. The student must qualify before receiving services. Unlike high school, the post-secondary school is not required to provide free appropriate public education. Post-secondary school is bound to provide appropriate academic accommodations as necessary to ensure not to discriminate on the basis of disability. The Office for Civil Rights, enforces Section 504, and the American with Disabilities Act prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability. In order to receive academic accommodations a student with a disability may need, they must identify themselves as having a disability. So we call that disclosure. Post-secondary schools have disability resource centers that are going to assist students in obtaining the requested academic accommodations. At Nevada PEP, we are optimistic that there are lifelong learning opportunities for all students. We encourage families to attend the Considering College training provided at the Nevada PEP offices, which we also do provide in a webinar. And there is an interactive guide that can help students kind of walk through what they need to do to prepare themselves for the college experience. Additional transition topics would be the eligibility for supplemental Social Security income, which is the requirements might be to have a disability, to have limited income, and limited resources. Parents' income and assets are considered for children under the age of 18, which is a process called deeming. Once a youth becomes an adult, their 18th birthday, the Social Security Administration considers only the youth's income and resources and not the parents. The youth becomes a family of one, even if he's still living in the family's home. If they continue to live with the parents after qualifying as an adult and don't pay for any food or shelter, then there could be a lower SSI payment rate. So sometimes parents may want to go through a process of charging rent to kind of show the contribution that the young adult is making in order to live in that household. This process to obtain Social Security or supplementary security income can take some time, and so parents may want to take 6 months prior to the 18th birthday, they may want to go ahead and start the process. Vocational rehabilitation is those with a disability that prevents the individual from getting or keeping a job and that they need assistance in obtaining employment. Vocational rehabilitation has made some changes with the acquisition of WIOA, which is the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, which requires vocational rehabilitation to provide pre-employment transition training and skills in order for students to start developing those soft skills and those pre-employment skills necessary in order to be able to be successfully employed. Parents or youth can contact the school's district assigned VR counselor or contact them independently from the school when the student turns 16 to fill out an application and determine eligibility. Sometimes viewing the orientation and video on the Nevada Vocational Rehabilitation website or attending an orientation meeting will kind of help the process begin so that they can start working with a counselor. The VR counselor can be invited to attend the IEP or Section 504 meetings. VR services can coordinate with some services with the school district while the student is still receiving services from the school district. So they could be working on a summer job to give that student more opportunities to learn about how to be an employee. One of the challenges as students are learning and gaining more skills is to make that transition from being a student to an actual either employee or a college student. Centers for Independent Living provide services to individuals with any type of disability. The core services offered by the Center for Independent Living include systems advocacy, individual advocacy, peer counseling, information referral, and independent living skills training. So keep in mind that it does take preparation and planning to help a student become an adult. Most certainly there will be some challenges, but the planning and preparation should make the process a little smoother. But there's no one way that transition should look like. It's an individualized process. There should always be choices and options provided to the student in this transition process. Students should be encouraged to become effective self-advocates. These skills will increase the opportunities for success well into the future. Each student's experience should be as individualized and as unique as they are and lead to these positive post-secondary outcomes. I want to thank you for joining us today. Again, we've got that question pane open. We look forward to taking your questions. Oh, got a question here. Let me see if we can do that. Okay, talking about an individual who's 16, is currently in the process of getting an IEP, never had one before. Would it be appropriate to also start? Absolutely. You want to start that transition planning, anytime that we are basically saying that that child is eligible for services. So in that first IEP, there should be transition planning. So those transition assessments should occur, and we should be really having that transition thinking. So great question. Thank you for asking it. It is important that we don't lose any time or we don't lose any ground in helping that student and their family talk about what's going to be happening after high school. Thank you for attending today. Thank you for the question. Thank you for being part of our Nevada family. You are, because you've attended this webinar, and we're grateful to have you participate. And we look forward to seeing you in another webinar. We want to encourage you to visit our website, nvpep.org. Once again, thank you very much for being here, and we certainly do hope that you have a wonderful day.